Good morning. You're muted.
There.
There we go.
Hey, how's your day? Beautiful.
Pretty good. All right. Let's see.
Should have Jackie and Stefan. There's Jackie.
Yep. There's Jackie now.
Hello.
Hello.
Is it Stefan or Steven? We should probably confirm that.
Ask him.
Not here. Not here yet. Oh, okay. There he is.
Was.
Okay, unmute yourself.
How's that?
There you go.
There you go.
We meet again.
We meet again. Yes, we do. That's great.
So is your first name, is it Steven or is it Stefan?
Oh, it's Stephen.
Okay.
PH, you know.
Okay.
But no, that's how I go with
All
it.
right, great.
That's the Irish spelling, actually.
That's good.
So do you go by Stephen, Doc, Mr.
I
Post?
just go by Stephen. I just like Stephen. I mean, not Stevie. That's my sister calls me that, and don't do that. But Stephen is, you know. So I hope you.
How many got, Ken?
I hope you enjoyed.
We got about 3 minutes.
Go ahead, Stephen.
I hope you enjoyed the book. You know, Larry Dossey was so generous to write a foreword for it.
It is an interesting. I haven't gotten all the way through it, but I can tell. You know what I really felt was it's a book like The Alchemist.
Okay.
Right. I don't know if that was your intention, but it's a story that takes you through morals, principles, and values.
Yeah, it is, and so even though at St. Paul's I was actually called the boy, I'm well aware that the boy fits into the Alchemist. And
right.
Two of my medical students got married 2 years ago. They're now in New York doing residencies, but I read a little passage from the Alchemist, and I like that, you know, that third voice. It's a lot easier than talking about myself and me and I. It's just horrifying. And also, it gives you a little bit of a mirthful detachment on this boy, you know, going through life. So I enjoyed writing that way. But I started writing this in 2000 as little vignettes that I sent out on my Institute electronic newsletter. And then I got away from it for many years. But I came back to it several years ago, maybe 5 years ago, just bit by bit, because I wanted to help people, you know, realize that they could notice something in the world around them that might be very healthy and good for them.
Yeah. And well, you know, all we can do is plant the seeds. And that's kind of where I want to take the show today too, is just, you know, plant some seeds. There are a lot of young people out there that are lost and confused. And I think a good sense of morals, principles, and values, and how the universe works and how they can tap into something.
And so, these males, these male white, especially the white males. I mean, I have a son who's 24. He's fortunately doing okay, but you know, it's so hard for them to find community, to find meaning. They just go into this empty vortex, and the result is some of the tragedies and horrifying things that we're seeing.
Totally.
Because, you know, they're on the ledge. I mean, they're on the ledge, just like Harry was.
Stand by. Here we go.
Here we go.
You can use. See you Thursday. Namaste.
The views expressed on contacttalkradio.com are those of the guest hosts and callers, and not necessarily of this station, its management, or other advertisers.
This is contacttalkradio.com. Consciousness in action. And you are taking action into your consciousness by tuning in to Contact Talk Radio.
And on tunein.com, Ping.fm, and UpSnap Mobile.
Contact Talk Radio. Welcome to Life Mastery with Todd Allen, the talk radio show that dives into the science of higher consciousness. Join Todd and his guests weekly at 10 a.m. Pacific Time and learn how to live a peaceful life with intentional mastery. Enjoy a survey of inspiring topics such as abundance, intention, health, manifestation, love, and transformation. It's all right here, leading authors, speakers, coaches, entrepreneurs with stories and messages to support your well-being, let alone your most evocative dreams.
Hey, it's another groovy day, and most of you know the reason for that is because when I got up this morning, I decided to make it that way. And today is Life Mastery Radio Day. Yay! One of my most favorite days of the week. I get to connect with some really cool people. Jackie and I get to hang out. We don't get to hang out that much anymore. And we really get to have a good time. And you know, Life Mastery Radio is a talk show that is designed to bring you some great thoughts and ideas for you to use on your very own life mastery journey. That's why Jackie and I show up every week. And at least I think that's why. Isn't that why you show up, Jackie?
Yeah. Or just because I want to see you too.
and we bring you a really cool guest that is on the cutting edge. Maybe not even the cutting edge, but just rehashing some ancient technology, ancient thoughts and ideas that really made a difference in people's lives then. And science is proving that it applies today. So there was some really good reason why they did it the way they did it way back then. That was a mouthful. As always, I have my co-host with me today, and she is a rock and rolling chick who is well on her way to making a difference in young people's lives. Hi, Jackie. How are you?
I'm good. I'm tired. Been actually working at construction the last couple weeks.
Jackie has been, I think she told me she spent 12 hours yesterday getting her studio ready for her young students to come. And this is a venture all on her own. She's creating her own school. And maybe entice us a little bit, Jackie. This is about teaching kids to speak their voice. Is that correct?
Well, it's called the Speak, Feed, Lead Public Speaking Studio. So it is for children, but it's also for adults. In fact, college students, our guest knows them well today, college students are often encouraged or required to send a video with their submission papers. And the video is supposed to be a 2-minute synopsis of something about themselves, why they want to be in this college, that kind of thing. And I can help them as well to develop that unique and personal, powerful message to attract those colleges that they want to attend. So that's something else I do besides teaching young kids how to have confidence and communication skills that will help them to be more powerful presenters as well.
And to be able to speak their thoughts and ideas. You know, I think, young people are so reserved in telling us or telling people what they think. And you provide an avenue to open that door up and I think mostly it's the experience and the confidence that they can speak their mind.
Of course. You know, the kids typically don't have a problem speaking their mind.
That's true.
But there are some kids who don't quite know really how to have a face-to-face conversation anymore because everything is done on a device. You know, they're using their thumbs more than their ears to listen to conversations. And in that device world, there's really no emotion. So helping these kids to develop an emotional connection with people that they're conversing with, that's something they lack. And it's kind of sad, but that's what we've devolved to, if you want to call it that.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit about that today with our guests, because I think that is a huge thing that we're recognizing. And like I always say, you know, it isn't really a bad thing, but I always like to say we don't know how we don't want to be until we get there. And I think we're getting really close if we're not there. So, yeah. So they can find out more. You can go to JackieBaileySpeaks.com. She is accepting applications for students. The studio's getting ready. I'm excited for her. You can see on her, even though she spent 12 hours yesterday getting it ready, she is putting love and effort into providing this space for others to come and learn and grow.
Yep. Thank you. Yeah.
I want to remind our listeners that today's show page is at www.lifemasteryradio.net. We have links to our guests, I don't want to say stuff, but content. There we go. We have links to our guests' content, and anything else that we talk about will be posted there after the show. You can tell your friends about it. We have a YouTube channel. All the links are at www.lifemasteryradio.com. Okay. Oh, while you're there, sign up for the newsletter.
Yeah, do that. Do that.
Jackie spends a lot of time every week creating a really nice newsletter. It's clear, it's concise, it's compelling, and it's designed for you to get the information about who's been on the show, who's coming on the show, and a blog post about the previous show that we just did, just to give you kind of some highlights and not really entice you, but just let you know the reason why you want to go and listen to the whole show.
Yeah, so in case you missed it, here's some highlights, but you got to go hear the rest of the stuff.
Okay.
Again, stuff.
I think we're done house cleaning or sweeping the whatever. We're not sweeping. We're just letting people know. Our guest today is an amazing individual who has been around the horn many, many times. He's a best-selling author, public speaker, and his name is Stephen G. Post, PhD. So that means he's a doctor. He is a best-selling author of Why Good Things Happen to Good People, How to Live Longer, Happier, Healthier Life by the Simple Act of Giving. And Jackie and I both are all about that. That was released by Random House in 2008. Dr. Post is among a handful of individuals awarded the Distinguished Service Award by the National Alzheimer's Association. And in 2001, he founded the Institute for Research on Unlimited Love. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that because Jackie was really big into that place. Yeah. Which researches and distributes knowledge on kindness, giving, and spirituality. He is a professor in the Department of Preventative Medicine at Stony Brook University and the founder and director of the Stony Brook Center for Medical Humanities, Compassionate Care, and Bioethics. His latest book, we're going to talk a little bit about that. It just came out in August. It just hit the charts. It's got many rave reviews, and the title of it is God and Love on Route 80. The Hidden Mysteries of Human Connectedness. And Dr. Post is all about being connected. This is what I found. The goodness of the universe is greater than ourselves. This book is for dreamers and questers of any spirituality who are looking for a positive meaning and purpose in life. On the road, we can find God, redemption, forgiveness, and the understanding that we are all connected. Dr. Post, welcome to the show. I guess I should say, Stephen, welcome to the show. How are you today, my friend?
I'm doing real well. Thanks for having me, Todd and Jackie.
Look, we've already got him amped up. Jackie's got this big, huge smile on his face. But that might be how he shows up in the world every day. Who knows? So it's good to see you, sir. And so this book, you told me during the pre-show that you started this book in 2000. Where'd the inspiration for it come from, and what kept you going with it for so long?
When I was a boy, I had a dream. That's a big story. People don't take adolescent spirituality sometimes to heart, and so many young people now especially young males, are caught up in this kind of emptiness, and they result to some very destructive things. But when I was a boy at 15, I had an amazing dream, and it just kind of set my life on a certain course. And so that had to do with Route 80, believe it or not. And that's why I started writing these little vignettes called God and Love on Route 80 in 2000, when I founded the Institute with Sir John Templeton, who co-named it with me. And I sent things out for a year or two, but then I got away from it. And maybe 5 years ago, I decided that I really wanted to to develop all of this journey. It's a journey story. It's a wild, it's sometimes a little bit crazy, but beautiful story about feeling connected with the universe and how it lured me out to the West and has continued to lure me on in life toward things that are meaningful and beautiful.
You know, a couple of, I haven't read the entire book, but a couple of times, you know, something shocking would happen to the boy. You wrote it in a third party perspective, I think.
Yes.
But he would always reflect back and think, oh, well, this is what God wanted it to do. So this is, I'm moving on.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a section there on when I came to Stony Brook. I'd been at Case Med School for 20 years, and we'd raised our family in Shaker Heights, a suburb of Cleveland. And I was a little bit shy about coming here, but the president of the university called me and she said, Governor Spitzer is going to be very helpful to you. So with my wife and my second child, our 14-year-old son, we sold the house. We came out east on Route 80, spent that first night in Stony Brook at a little place called the Three Village Inn by the North Shore. And it was raining like crazy. My son was getting texts from his buddies on the soccer team back in Ohio. He was upset. My wife was upset. So the boy did the only thing a boy could do. He went out to get pizza. And there in the foyer was a newspaper rack. And there were two papers. One was the New York Post with a front page of Eliot Spitzer and his liaisons of the night, shall we say. And it said, Governor no more. So I knew that was over. And then some cub reporter from a newspaper I'd never heard of called the Three Village Herald had found out that I'd done all this unlimited love research, and that was very spiritual in nature. And she'd gone to the dean of our medical school, Richard Fine, who's a transplant surgeon, and said, well, what are you hiring him for? And he said, well, we want him to teach our students to interact with empathy and compassion and attentive listening and presence. We didn't really hire him for this unlimited love stuff, but that's okay. We think he's pretty good. So I was going up the escalator the first day of work, and there was a guy who looked like Mr. Clean. He had big, thick arms. He looked down at me, and he said, are you Dr. Post? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, are you here to save us? Because the newspaper article that she wrote was, there were only one article on the front page was, unlimited love comes to Stony Brook. I thought, oh, no. So that night in the rain, you know, it's like, you know, if you could think of Jackson Pollock's painting, he lays down a bunch of paint on the mat in the middle, and it doesn't look like anything, but you have to cover it up with lots of beautiful lines of color and beauty and grace. And as you expand the canvas, it becomes meaningful. And actually, this has been a great experience, but it started with a big thunder shower, the Three Village Inn, Governor Spitzer being demoted for questionable reasons, and the Three Village Herald running this headline thing, unlimited love comes to Stony Brook. So I had a great night that night of thinking about how to bring something really beautiful out of a kind of a difficult moment. That's how life is. That's what Route 80 is, you know?
Yeah, totally. And even with this show today, we have a connected, you brought it up with unlimited love, and Jackie's doing research for the show, and in Jackie's book, she quoted a lot of places. I don't know, Jackie can take on from here, but she quoted unlimited love in her book.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so I wrote a book, Stephen, in 2014 titled Self-Centered Leadership, with SELF being an acronym for 4 qualities of exceptional leaders. They are sacrifice, empowerment, love, and friendship. So in my love chapter, I did some research about love in writing that chapter, and I found the Unlimited Love Institute, not realizing today when I heard Stephen G. Post as our guest, I didn't realize the connection right away. And so I quoted your work.
Hey,
my book. It's so cool. It's
so
so the connection.
that's the name of the institute. I mean, there's a story there. I mean, so Sir John Templeton and he was a philanthropist, and he really wanted to study gratitude and forgiveness and love. And he didn't have a lot of confidence in human love because it can be unwise and myopic and unenduring. But he always would tell me, we need to study love as a spiritual experience when people almost feel invaded by a kind of higher presence. He would say, don't just study human love, but the love that made humans. So I was sitting in my office at Case Western Med. You'll love this, Jackie. And I got a fax. Sir John, he was too old to email. You know, he was like 90 years old, but he thought the fax machine was the hottest thing ever invented. And I got a fax. I got faxes from him every day, and I had to respond. And he said, we should start an institute that studies the greatest asset, the greatest spiritual asset, which is unlimited love. So I faxed back, Sir John, okay, great idea. Let's do it. What should we call it? His return fax was the Institute for Research on Unlimited Love. Now, look, I'm in a big medical center. I'm even doing Alzheimer's genetic stuff, and I'm okay with it because it's my other side. But I wondered about the reception. So I faxed back, Sir John, maybe we should call it the Institute for Research on Creative Altruism, because altruism is a drier, social science-y, biological term. And he faxed back very correctly. He said, no, I think unlimited love up to $8.9 million. And I faxed back, I think, Todd, you might have done this too. I said, Sir John, I love that language. It jumps right off the page. And he was correct, you know, because it invited more dialogue with all the great spiritual and philosophical traditions. And I loved Sir John. And to me, you know, amazingly, he died in 2008. A week before he died, I got a call from his son, Jack, who was a pediatric trauma surgeon at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And he was down in Nassau with Dad. And Dad said, look, there's a book I want to write that I'm never going to be able to write because I'm dying. But would you ask Stephen to give it a try for me? So Jack called. I said, okay, I'll give it a try because I love Sir John. And I said, you have a title? And Jack said, yeah. Is Unlimited Love Ultimate Reality? I actually wrote the thing for the Templeton Press.
Wow.
But a lot of, you know, God and Love on Route 80 has some of those themes because, you know, nobody gets on Route 80 alone. You know, you encounter people and you respond to them. And I got so fortunate in my life to run into people like Sir John Templeton and so many other people on that incredible journey. And I still am on Route 80. If people ask me where I'm from, Jackie, I tell them, well, Route 80.
Somewhere on Route 80.
Yeah.
I was born on Route 80.
Yeah.
Well,
how did you know why?
Yeah, but how did you learn that? I mean, because you're a very well-educated man, very intelligent. Did you learn love, kindness, caring, and service in your education, or was there an experience that you had somewhere in your life that taught you that this is important to include?
Well, I mean, there are a couple of things. You know, one is, I came from a family that was okay, but we were very isolated on Oak Neck Lane along the Great South Bay of Long Island. There really were no neighbors. And I would be 4 or 5 years old. My mother would look at me with some degree of compassion, and she'd say, why don't you go out and help somebody? So I literally had a wagon, and I went out to Mr. Muller's house, Mr. and Mrs. Muller, and I would ask them if I could rake the leaves or shovel the snow or do something. And they became really my spiritual parents. They were very deep, prayerful. They were Christian. Every time I did a good deed, Mr. Muller would give me 2 nickels and say, save it for college. And he also taught me how to use a lot of carpentry tools. And we would burn biblical verses into pieces of pine and varnish them, like God loves a cheerful giver, or it's better to give than to receive. And then we'd nail them up on the trees because he lived behind this big woods. And so if you walk down the pathways, on every other tree, you know, you'd see these verses, and sometimes little Robert Frost. And, you know, he was very spiritual, and we would pray together, and his wife was great. And so I always felt when I got home that it's good to be good. I always felt elated and elevated for what had occurred. And that was very important to me. But then the next thing was the dream, which I'll tell you about in a minute when you want me to.
Yeah, no, we want to hear.
Yeah. So what happened was, you know, I was a Long Islander, and I felt somehow that I needed to get a wider experience. I was only 13 at the time. So I applied to this boarding school in Concord, New Hampshire called St. Paul's School. It's an Episcopal school. And I went up there, you know, for the 9th grade. They called it the third form. And I had some wonderful, wonderful Episcopal sacred studies teachers, one of whom, Reverend Rod Wells, was a Yale Div School grad and also a very good friend of Alan Watts. So he was really interested in Buddhism and Hinduism, and we worked a lot on that. So when I was 15, I had a dream that recurred about half a dozen times. You know, it's one of those dreams you're not quite sure if you're awake or asleep, and it was very vivid. And it struck me pretty deeply. So it was a dream where I would see some sort of road in the western direction. It was misty, silvery. You couldn't see very far, but there was a youth with stringy blonde hair on a ledge leaning out over the sea. And then the mist disappeared, and out of it came a blue angel who, in a feminine voice, said, "If you save him, you too shall live." And then the dream ended. And I would sit at the chapel of St. Peter and St. Paul. We all had morning chapel at 8 o'clock. I would get there earlier, and I would just meditate on this dream and try to think about the meaning of it. Because I knew I wasn't a believer in angels, but I knew that some dreams were just things we kind of make up because we're always desperate for meaning and we create things. And, you know, let's be honest about that. But I also felt, because this dream recurred and it was so explicit, that it was kind of luring me to the West. So believe it or not, my sacred studies teacher, Reverend Wells, took me to Yale when I was 16 to talk about the dream in a class on adolescent spirituality with this wonderful Jungian professor there, James Ditties. And it was on adolescent faith and spirituality. And I talked about the dream, and they asked me all kinds of questions. There were about 12 or 15 MDiv students, Masters of Divinity students, there around a table training for the ministry. It was a wonderful thing. And they said, "Well, what does it mean?" Well, I said, "You know, we all read Emerson's Oversoul up there at St. Paul's. It's kind of required." I said, "I'm the only person who really believes it. I believe that my mind isn't just cells and tissue and brain and matter, but I believe that in the beginning was mind. That somehow before space and time, mind, everything derives from mind, and mind and its energy underlies the universe." So I really believe that, and I explained it to them, and they said, "Wow, that's really something." And then I told them that I had actually applied to Reed College in Portland, Oregon. Now, no St. Paul's kids are called Paulies, okay? They all go to these Ivy League institutions. No Paulie had ever dreamed of applying to Reed College in Oregon, because it's kind of a wild place. And I like Robert Bly because he was the poet in residence and he was a Jungian too. So I told them I applied to Reed, and they couldn't believe it. They were like in shell shock. And we had this wonderful conversation about what I call the infinite mind, and how I was always studying as a kid Jung and synchronicity, and wrote my senior paper on that topic. So I believed in this deep unity of spirit and mind. But was I going to actually go out west? No, because I got into Swarthmore, and that was a place that was more acceptable for me, But Rod Wells, who's, by the way, his wife, Julie, Norman, now Julie Norman, they got divorced, but she wrote an endorsement for the book, and her email about me as my dorm mother is actually in one of the chapters. She said, she really liked me because I was so unsophisticated, and she thought I was pure of heart, and she wondered if I was going to be a terrible failure or a great success, and I'm not sure. But she still lives in Vineyard Haven, and we spoke on the phone yesterday. She's like 82 or 83. But anyway, so Rodwell's got me a job in the Bronx, and I was going to tutor a lot of kids who needed work, and I'd done that in Concord with some of the French Canadian families out in the countryside, and it was something I really loved doing. It was a service thing. It felt great, and it brought the best out in me. But my mom and dad said, no, you can't teach in the Bronx because it's too dangerous.
Dangerous.
Maybe it was, but I didn't think so. Anyway, we had a pretty serious argument. I would say it was really serious. It wasn't a fight, but it was a big argument. And in the end, my mother said, look, if you insist on this, I'm not going to cover Swarthmore for you. And I said, Mom, that's a really bad thing to say, but if you really, 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 really insist, I guess I'll try something else. But what could it be? So my dad was the president of W&J Sloan's furniture store on Fifth Avenue, which was an old style place across from Scribner's Books. And it was pretty distinguished. He knew all the manufacturers of furniture, of lamps, of everything in greater New York. So my dad said he'd been a commander in the Navy. He'd been in Japan. He'd been at Sicily. He said, "I've got just the solution. You can work in Bill de Bono's lampshade factory."
I read that in the book, and I was just blown away.
So I spent 2 weeks. I'm not complaining. I spent 2 weeks working in Patchogue, Long Island, between two really, really large but very nice. I respected them, Italian women. And I was cutting cardboard in the hot, sweaty building with no air conditioning. And my dad had a secondhand gray Mercedes 190, which I know he bought just to drive us up to St. Paul so he could kind of look cool. But they had another family car. So I would take the Mercedes to work. It was about a half an hour drive. And after 2 weeks of this, I was at my wit's end. And I went out to West Hampton Beach, which is kind of a hangout on Eastern Long Island for young people. And I had a St. Paul's friend, Livy Sutro, and then a gal friend named Lee who lived out there. And about 11 at night on a Friday night, I decided, I'm going to follow my dream. Now, let's recognize, I'm really honest about this. There was a push and there was a pull. The push was life at home wasn't very good, and I did not want to work in the lampshade factory. But the pull was still this impression that the dream was a kind of a premonition. So I had my classical guitar. I had Siddhartha. I had Aldous Huxley's Ultimate Reality book, and I had a couple of articles of clothing, and I got in the Mercedes 190 with my $50 in my wallet. And I just drove. I drove down, I remember so vividly, I drove down the Sunrise Highway. I drove through the Midtown Tunnel. I drove over the George Washington Bridge. I'd never been west of the George Washington Bridge, and I saw a sign. Well, there were two signs. One said 95 South. Well, there was no South in my dream, but there was a sign that said
80.
Route 80 West. And I just followed it.
Wow.
And I went through the Delaware Water Gap for the first time. I got out to the middle of Pennsylvania, to the exit that's near Lewisburg. And in those days, cars had something called generators. And if the generator broke, everything was dead instantaneously. The lights were out, the engine stopped, there was no second chance. So you were dead where you were. And so just as I was thinking, I'm going to do a U-turn over the Midway because I'm going to go home and I'm going to save what's left of my reputation. I thought I'm going to change my mind. And just as I was thinking that, the generator broke. And I was able to get the 190 over on the right shoulder of Route 80. And there was nothing I could do. There were no telephone booths. There was nothing except, it was about 5 in the morning. I could kind of make out wheat fields and cornfields as far as the eye could see. And that was it. So, being a young guy, I didn't have much executive function. Like your frontal cortex isn't quite working right. So I took a piece of paper out of the glove compartment and I wrote a note which became a historical legacy in my family. To the Pennsylvania State Police, please return this car to Henry A.V. Post. In the book, I don't actually identify him. I said, but I wrote, the note actually said, to Henry A.V. Post, 44 Davison Lane East, West Islip, New York, 516-669-5655, from his son, Stephen, who no longer works in the lampshade factory. And then I had my guitar and I had my stuff. I stuck my thumb out. This big, huge truck came by, and a fellow named Gary, who was country and western, sort of flung the door open and said, "Well, where are you going, boy?" And I said, "West." And he said, "Well, I can get you to Chicago." And that's how it began.
Wow. Wow.
And,
now, how many times did you have this recurring dream?
6 times.
Really?
Yeah, and it was my 16th year, basically, and I talk about it in, we had great classes, and I talked about it with my peers, and I went to a high school graduation reunion in early June, and people still talked about the dream, and Julie remembered the dream, and I wasn't fanatic about it. It's just I was really curious about it, and I asked people what they thought of it, and no one quite knew what to say. So I didn't know what to think of it. I thought, again, it could just be some little trick that my mind is playing on me. But then I went west and things seemed to come true, which is the next part of the story. I spent a couple of nights in Grant Park in Chicago, because that's where Gary dropped me off. I played Villalobos, earned some money on the benches, met up with a group of 4 or 5 hippies who were heading for San Francisco. They offered me a ride. They were very nice people. Took Route 80, got out to Nebraska. Now, if you're in Nebraska, there's Omaha, and then you keep going, there's Lincoln. We got near Lincoln, and there was a very, very attractive young hippie gal. And she said, "You really ought to call your mother."
Yeah.
And
you had not done that up to that point?
No. Gary asked me to, but I said, I wasn't sure what I'd say. So we stopped by one of those phone booths in Nebraska, and we pulled over, and I called my mother, Colette. And my mother picked up the phone. She said, "Oh my God, Stevie, you're alive. We can call off the Pinkertons." The Pinkertons are detectives,
Right.
So I said, in total adolescent, I don't know, I'm not sure, narcissism or whatever. I said, "Mom, why'd you call the Pinkertons? Didn't you get my note?" That was terrible. And then she said, "Well, we did get the note, and we realized we should have let you tutor in the Bronx. And Dad got the car towed back, and it's in the shop getting fixed." So she said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "Well, I'd like to go out to San Francisco. Do you have Cousin George's address?" So Cousin George Lamont he'd been a Chinese studies major at Chapel Hill in North Carolina. He'd done 2 tours of duty in Vietnam. The second one was actually in Laos. And he was part of that subculture there. So I went out there, and I spent the summer on George's floor. He had an apartment on Chenery Street. And then on Chenery Market, there was a Nam Myoho Renge Kyo Nichiren Shushu Buddhist community. And I started going there, and I met this wonderful old Japanese guy who'd been interned during the war in Hawaii named Gus. And he became my mentor, and I loved it. It was very mystical, just with all those people chanting and rubbing those beads and all the noise. It was just incredible. And then I was playing Granados and Ponce and Hispanic restaurants all summer, making pretty good money. But I drew a bad number in the draft. It was when they put the birth dates in the bin. And so I called Reed, because I turned them down. They'd accepted me, but I turned them down. I said, "Look, I'd like a spot in your class. You accepted me." And I said, "No, but I got a problem." And they said, "Okay." So one morning, this is really what changed my life. One morning, we're at the temple. It's Chenery and Market. It's about 7:30 in the morning.
And this is in San Francisco?
San Francisco, yeah. Yep, in the Mission District. So there's a little going away chant for me, and George is there, and Gus is there. And I took the Market Street bus to Golden Gate Park. Then I walked across Golden Gate Park, which is a bit of a walk. It's maybe a 10, 15-minute walk. And then you hit the entrance area to the Golden Gate Bridge. And so I walked up the bridge. Now it was misty, silvery, gray. You couldn't see more than about 4 or 5 feet in front of your nose. And I'm on the left side because there's a pedestrian walkway there. And then there's a kind of a railing that's about belly high. I get to the middle of the bridge and I hear a little bit of a shuffling. I'm not sure what it is. Could hardly notice it, but I looked to my left and there I saw the outline of a young guy with blonde hair, stringy blonde hair, and he was leaning out on the ledge. And I looked at him and I said to him, I truly hope that you're not planning to jump. And then he looked at me and he was pretty angry and he said, what's it to you? And this dialogue went back. He quoted those lines from Macbeth, life is an empty nothingness. And I said, you know, I mean, it was really an interesting conversation. I said, you know, I actually agree with that. I think I live on the ledge too. I think a lot of us live on the ledge and it's okay. You know, you can work through it. And in some ways, you know, it's a blessing. And he was just really adamant. But then I told him, look, I don't want you to jump because I think I came out here all this way to encounter you. And I can't say that's for sure, but I think that's what happened. And I explained to him that I had a dream at St. Paul's School. And I said, by the way, at St. Paul's, you know, we did Macbeth, but those lines, they didn't sound as serious in Memorial Hall as they do when you're out on a ledge leaning over the San Francisco Bay.
Wow.
And I said to him, you know, I had this argument with my parents. I went to Yale Divinity School. I explained the dream. I was going to tutor. I even stole my dad's gray Mercedes 190 that had seen better days and left it on the middle of the highway. This took me about 20 minutes, you know, because I wanted to engage him. I told him about the note to the Pennsylvania State Police. I told him about calling mom in Nebraska. I told him about everything. And then he looked at me and he said, you know, you are really crazy. And he said, you should be out here, not me, something along those lines. I said, well, you know, actually, you know, there isn't that much difference.
Totally.
And I believe that, you know, because we're all struggling to find meaning in our lives and purpose and hope. So I said, look, I've got something for you that's going to change your luck. And he said, what's that? And I said, well, I had in my backpack a Gajon zone, which they'd given me at the Nichiren Shushu temple. And it's like a scroll. It's a Japanese scroll. And if you have a Gajon zone, it gives you a lot of good fortune the rest of your life. And you're not supposed to give it away or it's bad karma. So I said, I've got a Gajon zone, and if I'm going to give it to you, and it will give you a new life. And he said, you know, explain that to me. And I said, look, for me to explain this to you, you have to come over on this side of the rail. So he actually did. I mean, he stepped over the railing, and I unscrolled this thing, and I explained to him what it meant. You know, there were symbols of one mind, and then the Japanese symbol for busy, which is a heart with a line through it, okay, meaning no time, and or no heart. And I explained to him, and I said, look, you know, this is what you need. And we actually chanted a little bit on the bridge, sort of over the water. And I told him, I'll give this to you on one condition. You have to walk down the bridge, because I'm going the other way. I was going north to Reed College. You have to walk down the bridge. You have to walk across the park. You have to get the Market Street bus. I gave him a few bucks. And you have to go to Cousin George's. And I actually gave him a note to my cousin George at 4 Tennery Street. And I said, George, this is Harry. Please let him sleep on your floor and take him down to the temple and let him meet Gus. And he actually, so I didn't go back there. I went back at Thanksgiving because I had a fall break from college. And but he did go back, and he got really interested in Buddhism and this idea of the one mind. And he actually found a girlfriend. I don't put that in the book, but he found a girlfriend in you know, who he was with at George's. And then the two of them went to North Carolina, and no one ever heard of them again. But that's the story. When I walked down the bridge going north, the mist was evaporating and the blue sky was showing up, and I just had this feeling like maybe somehow or another, this wasn't just my subjectivity, but it just felt like this was kind of set up, and it was so close to the dream. Now, if you're doing biostat and epi and statistics, you can say, well, at some point in the history of the universe, this little event could happen by pure chance. But to me, it was clearly synchronicity. It was a mark that we're all so cherished by this loving infinite mind, pure unlimited love. We're so cherished. And all we have to do is notice it. We just have to open our eyes and open our hearts, and we can see this happening in the background of our lives. But for me, learning that that day, it was unbelievable. And I got down to the end of the bridge, and I never felt again that there was any danger of my life feeling empty and meaningless, and I was going to go get sucked down into some negative vortex, which I always worried about. And I put my thumb out, and I was getting ride from trucks, never cars. And this pickup truck drove by, and this guy flung open the door. I'll never forget it. He said, "Hey, boy, my name's Dwayne Dill." Yep, just like in dill pickle, D-I-L-L. And this here's my wife, Dorothy. and she said, "Hello." And they drove me up mostly to Oregon, not all the way. And then I got another ride. And then there's it's episodes of synchronicity that go on, and then the motorcycle story, which you got to ask me some questions or something. But the motorcycle story was the next incredible episode. And my mother was so moved by that she was an abstract expressionist. She actually painted a beautiful painting called The Blue Angel Dream.
And so I have to assume then, Stephen, that you never had the dream again.
Never had the dream again. It was an adolescent thing. And I'm not a huge dreamer. I sometimes I actually have a little notebook, and my wife has a lot of very intuitive dreams. She would always dream about her friends when they got pregnant, or the other day we were at a meditation place and she had a little vision of pink steps. And then a couple of days later, my daughter, who lives in Venice, California, sent us a picture of how she'd had her new place repainted, and there were pink steps. My wife has that more than I do. But when I went up to read, I got to study with Robert Bly, who was a great poet. He was the poet in residence, and I told him about the Blue Angel Dream, and he loved it. And then that January, it was like late January, and a lot of your listeners know it doesn't snow a lot in Oregon, but it rains a lot, and sometimes on a cold night, it gets kind of slushy and slippery. And so I'm sitting in the student coffee shop. These were kind of the days of jobs and people, and I'm sitting there, and in bursts, it's about 9 o'clock Pacific Coast time. In bursts this guy with a black leather jacket on, and he says, "Hey, I'm Andy." He's kind of, if eyes were electric, he would have been on fire. And he said, "I've got a new Harley Davidson shovelhead, and who wants to go for a ride?" And like a complete fool, because I still don't have any executive function. You understand, Jackie? Okay. I said, "I'll go for a ride." So I went out into the parking lot, and I got on this motorcycle, and he took off like 140 miles an hour. He ran every red light, every stop sign in Portland, and and this is slippery and slidey, and he went down south on the Pacific Coast Highway toward California. And I came to tears because he hit 180, and I thought this was the end of my life. I was asking him to stop. He wouldn't stop. He was clearly out of his mind. And then, believe it or not, after an hour, he did this unbelievable sort of U-turn, Evel Knievel style, over the Midway, and he drove back, same speed, went through all the lights and stop signs, and he dropped me off at exactly the place where he'd picked me up. I got off the bike, and I was like completely breathless. I was covered with wet, and I was so cold, and I was completely blown away by this. So I I walked across the ravine. There's a little bridge with a ravine over to the dormitory. Now, I never picked up the phone at this dormitory. There were pay phones on the wall, okay? But I'd given the number to my mom. And so just as I walked over the threshold, now remember, it's 11 o'clock West Coast time. So it's about 2 o'clock in New York. And I hear the phone. I kind of feel pushed a little bit over toward the phone. And I pick it up and I say, hello. And it's my mother. And she says, Stevie, you're alive. And she said, I just woke up. I had this incredible dream. I was sweating. I was shaking and frightened because I thought you were dead.
Yeah.
And I said, Mom, I'm not dead, but I thought I was dead too. And then we had a long talk. And that was when we really began to come close together for the first time, actually, because we both figured, well, if she's 3,000 miles away, and then you got all these things like the Rocky Mountains betwixt and between, you know, figured, oh man, you know, how did she know that? And how do you explain that one away?
Yeah, I've had many experiences with my mother like that, just exactly like you described, you know, walking up to a telephone and it's way beyond coincidence. It's just pure synchronicity and answering that phone, and it's my mom. How does that happen?
How does it happen? That's where you have to talk about, you know, I mean, Larry Dossey's work is so good, non-local mind, that there's something about our mind that is not just biologically explained. It's not just derived from tissue, but there's something about our mind that is universal and infinite and a gift, and we participate in it. And that's why your mom, Todd, could call you at those times. That's why Ramanujan could be inspired, you know, while praying to his goddess in India with no background in mathematics, and write those things down on the dirt, make his notebooks, and they're right at the center of Trinity College, Cambridge University, and they are the complete baseline of all quantum physics. So there's something about this. And so that was the second episode of synchronicity. But I also thought about it at that time, that my mom, you know, she was 3,000 miles away. So I realized that, you know, I'd had the dream. It was now 2 years ago. So somehow or another, the dream was beyond time and beyond place. And I was growing. I was realizing the depth of our connectedness, which many of us realize, I think, at a deep level, but we're embarrassed to talk about it. You know, try talking about it in a medical school where you're surrounded by a lot of people with test tubes. But when you talk about it, you know, it's like, Todd, they all say, you know, I had an experience like that.
Yeah. Well, so how did those experiences change you then? I mean, what did you do differently after those experiences that you wouldn't have done prior to them?
Well, I always noticed. I really became a listener, a noticer, and I went back to New York, and I actually became a dialysis technician for a year. And you know, I would one night, it was actually Christmas night, I was doing the night shift, and all these old-fashioned dialysis machines were very crepity and decrepity, and one of them exploded, and the blood was on the ceiling, and everybody was having blood pressure drops. And I thought, you know, it's Christmas. I know some of you are Christians, some of you are Jews, some of you are whatever you are, but I said, I want to tell you a story. And I told them the whole story about the dream and Route 80 and the bridge and the motorcycle. And this little Jewish lady, she looked at me, she was on dialysis. She said, oh, you don't ever take your father's car like that again. And she smiled like it was mischief, you know. And we spent, and so, you know, I realized that somehow, you know, and over my life, I would sometimes tell people I trusted. Like when I went to I dropped out of the University of Pennsylvania in a doctoral program in immunology that was completely covered by the National Institutes of Health. And I'd lectured at the Wistar Institute, but I just quit. I quit it all because I felt that I had to follow the dream. So I went to the University of Chicago Divinity School. And at that time, it was incredible, you know, in world religions. I mean, Wendy O'Donegar and Mircea Eliade and Joseph Campbell was a visiting scholar there. So I sat in the Swift Kick dining room, which is in the bottom of Swift Hall. And I told Mircea Eliade and Joseph Campbell, they were very different. Eliade had all these tufts of hair coming out his ear and he was sort of shoveled over. And Campbell was always dapper and he wore a tie, sometimes a bow tie and a nice jacket. And I told him the story of the Blue Angel dream. And Joseph Campbell said, synchronicity, not luck, quote. And Mircea Eliade asked me, so is it all synchronicity? And that's a difficult question. And I told him, well, a lot of it is, but not all of it. And we had that conversation. But I loved being there, and it was one of the nicest times of my life. And I used to say to people, when they asked me where I'm from, I'd say, well, really, I'm from Route 80.
I was born on Route 80.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they would ask me about how I got interested in spirituality and love and religious studies. And I wrote my dissertation on love, kindness, altruism, and how it leads to flourishing in the agent. Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi was writing his flow book there, and we were doing ecological momentary assessment, all kinds of things. But I said, I would explain to them my Blue Angel dream. And so in the book, I say, every Blue Angel dreamer on Route 80 has to end up at the University of Chicago Divinity School.
Oh my gosh, Stephen, we only have about 3 minutes left. Can you believe it just blew by? I could listen to you tell stories all day long. Don't you think, Jackie?
Oh, absolutely. Amazing.
Yeah. And meeting Sir John. I met Sir John. Larry Dossey came to a meeting on religion and health at a golf club near the airport in Virginia, Dulles. And he was going to meet Sir John, and this is like 1989, 1990, and asked Sir John to fund some of these conferences on the idea of the one mind. And so I was there that night, and I helped introduce Sir John and Larry Dossey together, and they had dinner. And, I've just been so blessed, totally blessed by encountering unbelievable people on Route 80. It's all Route 80 to me. And the other day, I took my wife to Mitsuwa, which is a Japanese food shop in Edgewater, New Jersey, along the Hudson. She shopped for 2 hours, but you know what I did? I actually took a drive down Route 80 toward the Delaware Water Gap just to kind of smile and
think. Can't get away from Route 80, can you?
No way.
Everything happens on Route 80.
That's it.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
Oh my gosh, Stephen. What a joy it was to have you on the show today and hear your stories. I'd love to have you back and we could talk more about life on Route 80 or anything else that pops up. I think it was great. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Well, it's a delight. And Todd, you and Jackie, you've both been great and very hospitable. And also, Jackie, I'm thankful that you send me, email me the title of your book and I'll order a copy of it. Okay.
Sure.
Because I'd love to see how that got picked up. That book did pretty, Why Good Things Happen to Good People did okay. And it's really, it's a book about karma and about life inventory. And if you live good, if you're in a reasonably functional environment and you contribute to the lives of others, there are going to be all kinds of things that as a byproduct, you don't have to intend them, but just as a side effect kind of naturally come your way. And that's what leadership is in part, right? I mean, just being
absolutely
in that zone.
Yep.
Yeah.
You got it.
Oh my goodness. That's about all we have time for today. Here, I'm going to introduce you to my girlfriend, Coach Debbie.
Hi, Debbie.
Hi,
Debbie.
How are you?
She was going to connect with you and have you on her talk radio show, which is called Store You Talk Radio.
Well, I'd be happy to do that, Debbie.
Jumped in. Sorry.
She's a huge follower of Joseph.
Okay. Well, float me an email and we'll do it.
Yep. I'll hook you up.
Okay. Where are you located, by the way? Are you in?
What?
Where are you located? You're in
Seattle.
Oh, you're in Seattle. That's right. You're in Seattle. Oh, great. Oh,
gotta go. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed the show today. Tune in again next week for another episode of Life Mastery Radio. Make it a great day. It's all about choice. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Is that Debbie C? Thanks for having me. Okay, great. Okay.